And welcome to this special segment of TIA Now. We're here with Cliff Young. He's the President and Chief Executive Officer of ClearPath Networks. And Cliff, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Abe. Glad to be here.
Thanks for being here. There's a particular space that I want to focus on in the NFV kind of arena, if you will. It's virtual CPE. ClearPath very much on top of this NFV use case. What are the challenges and really benefits in virtual CPE right now?
Yeah, so you have identified a real key use case for operators in general. Virtual CPE is part of a broader set of use cases that vCPE ISG has defined as virtual network function as a service. Those sets of use cases where operators are delivering edge services out to their end users, and those functions, might be embedded as part of virtual CPE, or they may be services that are embedded in other functions. So we are focused primarily today on virtual CPE because, in the evolution of virtual network function as a service, this is a real low-hanging fruit opportunity for operators. The interest in virtual CPE in general with operators is to monetize NFV. They're seeking to, take offerings that may have become commoditized over time and add value to them. They also want to tap into new markets with the ability to offer managed services to segments that otherwise would not have been able to afford traditional managed services. So there's interest from the operators in a number of areas of virtual CPE, but generally they're looking to increase their acceleration on the revenue side, expand their margins, minimize commoditization of core offerings such as broadband by embedding functions and adding value and creating game-changing offerings. But they're also seeking to provide scale-out managed services to upmarket into enterprises in general.
Now, virtual CPE is virtualizing on-premise. If you were to take that all the way back to the network, could you either give me an example or just explain the mechanics of that, starting with virtual CPE and then back to the network?
Yeah, so you've correctly identified, some of the different types of virtual CPE use cases. We like to say that it's really all about providing instant network anywhere, because the enterprises need these functions to live wherever their users are. And those users may be very distributed. They may require functions to be living in countries that are off the provider's network, in which case they might want them to be instantiated in a public cloud. They may also need them to live on the customer premise or in their private cloud, or a combination of all of these things. So what we're seeing are use cases with the operators where they're starting with kind of a foundation of delivering these edge services cloud-based within the operator network, and that may be the new telco cloud that they're creating, or it may be a reinvention of the central office as a data center. We're seeing that emerging as well as an implementation model. But generally, the operators are also looking to lower the cost of their CPE, to move some of those CPE functions to the cloud, and to have a hybrid model where there's a service chaining between functions that live on commoditized, off-the-shelf, low-cost CPE with functions that are living in the cloud, and that way that CPE device becomes a vehicle for them to be able to dynamically push different kinds of functions depending on what the users require.
Anytime you virtualize any NFV function, IoT function, or just a use case, security becomes top of mind, really. Either in the cloud, in the data center, but in your situation, maybe more on the edge. What is the most challenging security topic or issue right now with virtual CPE?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. So you're right. Security is top of mind for operators. One of the benefits of virtual CPE versus the more traditional model where you have services that are delivered via shared proxy is that it does provide isolation on a per customer basis. So we're seeing that operators want to continue that model around creating isolation between their various customers. And so one vehicle for doing that is with a virtual machine. The challenge with doing it with a virtual machine is the infrastructure cost, or the NFVI cost, as Etsy defines it, because you have specific limitations around VM density on a per server basis. So the newer technologies that are emerging around containerization is a real focus for us, and we're seeing it also moving in the industry. The industry has not yet developed secure containerization. We believe it's going to evolve, and we're helping to make sure it does evolve. But we have developed a proprietary container technology that tries to leverage the best of both worlds, the efficiency of containerization and the security of virtual machines. So the way that we do that is we have a very low cost but lightweight Linux container that we've created, which is today a ClearPath container, and that is very tiny. We call it a nano container. It's about 10 megabits in size. And then we run that in a KVM instance. And then with that, we can instantiate multiple LXC containers. And then another capability, another technology that ClearPath has developed is to be able to service chain multiple functions within the same container. So by doing that, we're able to get a 30 to 50 times improvement around NFE cost utilization. The traditional model of virtual CPE is you take one virtual network function and you put it in a virtual machine. And if the customer requires 3 functions for their service, you would have 3 virtual machines. Our model is to take a virtual function and those 3 functions, service chain them together within a single container, and then run multiple containers within the same virtual machine. So ultimately, we believe we'll be able to support multiple types of container technologies as the security improves around those. But for now, we're taking our proprietary container, running it in virtual machines, and using a hybrid model to be able to meet the cost efficiency requirements that the operators need to be able to embed these functions within existing services very cost efficiently.
I'm glad you brought up containers, because this is something we're hearing more about. You talked about NFV cost efficiency. And this is a question that you alluded to, but I want to get a little bit more granular on. As far as from the cost perspective on NFV containers, doesn't the cost associate with the operating system within the container? In other words, each virtual machine has their own operating system, right? OS, but in a container construct, you only have one OS for many virtual machines. Is that where the cost savings comes in?
Yes, essentially with virtual machine, you're running one, you have a host and a tenant. So on that virtual machine, you will run a tenant that'll have its own operating system. With containerization and running Linux containers, you can then take that single Linux operating system, that tenant, and you can run multiple containers within that single operating system. So you certainly get efficiencies that way. You also get the ability to spin up functions much faster. But the isolation isn't quite there today. So we use the virtual machine to provide isolation between a group of tenants and other groups of tenants.
ClearPath talks a lot about OpenNFE platforms. You just had a fairly recent partnership with HP to that effect. What does it mean to have an OpenNFE platform?
Yeah, well, the industry has been very clear about requirements on openness. The operators are uniformly telling us, and I think all the vendors, that they don't want vendor lock-in. That is a critical requirement. In addition to that, the operators are looking for agility. They're looking to innovate quickly, and so that requires, integration. Implementing anything requires integration. If you have common interfaces, the more of that capability that becomes standardized, the more likely it is that your integration costs are going to be minimized or eliminated completely. So we highly support standardization as an accelerator for the industry. And we're seeing great adoption. In fact, this event here at OpenNFE is really evidence of that. We founded OpenNFE. It was launched in September of last year. We're only 14 months into it. And here at this event, we've had roughly 750 attendees, which is the fastest uptake of any open source organization in terms of attendance so far.
I'd like to get back to virtual CPE and the relationship between that and software-defined WAN, and why that space has become crowded. Why is that?
Well, so there are a number of players, especially on the software-defined WAN side, supporting enterprise types of deployments. And NFE has emerged really to support carrier requirements in particular, which are somewhat different than enterprise requirements. We believe that over time, these two areas are going to merge, and the use cases will become quite similar. But for operators today, their requirements around scale out, around service availability, and in other areas are somewhat different than enterprise. So ClearPath has taken a operator-centric approach. I mean, we are exclusively focused on NFE and use cases for operators. Some of the quote software-defined WAN players are focused more on the other side, on the enterprise side. We do see use cases with operators where they want to provide network service overlays to enterprises, and they do call those use cases, in some cases they call them software-defined WAN use cases, and we support those kinds of use cases. But generally the software-defined WAN players are focused more on the enterprise space.
You mentioned that in the NFV space you focus primarily on the operator. Is the concern maybe a couple years back that there might be a rip and replace effect while with the migration towards virtualization networking? Is that in the past now, or is that still a concern?
I think that operators have both greenfield and brownfield opportunities that they're looking at. I think very early on they were more focused on things were more theoretical, and they were focused more on what are they going to need to do within the core network, and so there were more rip and replace types of initiatives initially that were being thought about, and they still are today. But in addition to that, the operators have thought more about, okay, we've been involved with NFE for a while now, SDN for a while, how can we monetize this? Where's the low-hanging fruit? And in that area, they found that the edge services really represent a great area of opportunity, in part because they're a short path to revenue, and in part because they don't have as much legacy infrastructure that they need to rip and replace in order to achieve the benefits of NFE.
Let's expand a little bit on that. So you focus primarily on the operator in the NFV space, and you find the most value at the edge. Which vertical in particular is ClearPath focusing on, or what vertical have you found to be the most beneficial for the operator right now?
Well, so the operators have long, had the SMB market segment. So not typically what you think of as a vertical, but that market segment has been underserved for many, many years. When you think of SMBs, they lack the resources to be able to implement, highly reliable network infrastructure, yet they depend on all the same services in order to compete with larger enterprises. So they really need managed services. They really could use outsourcing the most, but have been able to afford it the least. So the operators have seen that there's a real opportunity to tap this underserved market segment if they can provide services value cost effectively enough. And that's been the challenge really with penetrating the SMB market, is you need a high degree of automation and centralized management so that you can enable these SMBs to very cost effectively receive services and be able to self-service those services. So NFE is really bringing out kind of a paradigm shift here for operators, in that they're not only able to penetrate that more underserved SMB market, but they're also able to embed value into existing offerings and create more value with their core offerings, which helps them minimize churn, helps them reduce price erosion, which are two big factors in terms of driving ROI in their business model. But it also provides them now with a broader base by which they can upsell, because as they embed value, they embed services into their existing offerings, now their entire base begins to use the tools that they have to be able to order new services, to be able to get more interactive value from the operator. So it really adds value for the operators in a number of ways for this particular market segment. We're also seeing the MSOs focusing on the residential market very heavily with doing something similar. The virtual network functions that they're looking at are somewhat different. The cable operators are more focused on things like parental controls and helping their residential customers manage, that kind of device sprawl that happens, within every family today, where your kids are using all kinds of devices and all kinds of apps on those devices, and the parents have very little control. Whereas with the SMB market, they tend to be, much more diverse set of VNFs that the operators are seeking to offer. And that also is both a challenge for the operators tackling the SMB market as well as an opportunity, because within the SMB market and the enterprise market in general, it's very diverse in terms of the kinds of applications that are necessary. And so the operators are realizing that a critical success factor in the market is to be able to offer their customers a broad range of choice. And so that application marketplace becomes absolutely critical. So you can say that it's not enough to just be able to offer virtual appliance or even certain types of virtual appliances, but you need to be able to offer an application marketplace that provides a wide range of choice. And it may be that in the future, as all operators are providing NFE, it's those operators that offer the best application marketplace become the winners. So if you look at, a good analogy there is what Apple has done with iPad versus Android, and early on the iPhone was the clear leader. Why? Because they had all the apps. And then as Android began to catch up in terms of apps in the marketplace, adoption improved. Wasn't the only driver, but it was a key driver. So for the future, we view the ability to enable the operators with a easy to implement and maintain and broad application marketplace is a critical success factor. And for that to happen, new technologies need to be developed.
So you referenced the application marketplace. You talked a lot about SMBs, the enterprise community, and you just mentioned data modeling. This time next year, maybe even at this event, what do you think we'll be talking about as far as NFV?
Yeah, I think data model, service abstraction for NFE is going to be the hot topic. Of course, security is always on everyone's mind, and that's not going away anytime soon. Containers are hot right now, and they will continue to be hot for sure. But I think the new topic that is going to be one of the very hottest topics, if not the hottest, is going to be around model-driven service abstraction. So, how do we bring kind of model-driven service abstraction down to the NFE layer? That's been addressed at the SDN layer. So integrating all the various components requires kind of a unified service model. But when you think about onboarding virtual network functions, the same is true. It's important that we can not only onboard a virtual network function into an application marketplace and have it be able to work with, integrate with and work with all the various services that go on in terms of fault management, accounting, and those various FCAPS functions. But it's also important that as these functions change, which they do constantly, that the operator is not burdened with having to reintegrate these functions every time something changes. So what we're looking to do is to build an abstraction layer and contribute that to the community. We have an open source project called YangForge. It's essentially a Yang-based tooling mechanism that allows the VNF provider to be able to express their function as a Yang model. And if this Yang forge runs on the platform as well, then every time those Yang models are updated by the vendor, then the platform can automatically update itself to be able to integrate with it and run it, as well as make any changes to any of the other functions that may depend on it. And we think that's a very critical, necessary step forward for the industry in order to really be able to offer consumers that broad range of application choice.
Cliff, it was good to talk to you. We like to get some feedback from industry stakeholders about virtualizing, again, not only the data center or in the cloud, but really at the edge as well. I think we touched on that quite a bit here. So thanks for your time.
Hey, thank you. I appreciate you having me.